Good morning, students. This is the last chapter for your second terminal examination. One more chapter, that is skin, we will do after your second term. So we have to do with skeleton. So let's start with this topic. So skeleton. First of all, we have to see what are the functions of the skeleton. Okay. So first function is it helps in support. It provides the support to the body. So a skeleton will provide the support and framework to the body. Then it also provides a shape. You just imagine if there will be no bones, you will just be a mass of muscles. So it will provide, and mass of muscles will be just like a ball. But this skeletal framework is providing a shape to your body. Another important function of human skeleton is for protection. The very soft and delicate organs of our body, which are vital for our existence, is being protected inside the skeletal system. Like your brain is protected inside the skeletal system, your lungs, your heart is protected inside the rib cage. So various organs, soft and delicate organs, are protected by the human skeleton. It also helps in movement. As we know, the muscles are attached to the bones. So when the muscles are attached to the bones, and when the muscles will contract and relax, the bones will either move towards the joint or away from the joint. So in that way, it will help in the movement. Then it also provides the leverage. Leverage, it means liver. You have studied in physics, class 1 liver, class 2 liver, class 3 liver. So your body and your skeletal system at various times acting as the effort, fulcrum and load, and this is how it helps in the lifting of the substances and the lifting of the different parts of the body. We will see in the last part of this topic about the leverages. Then formation of the blood cells. The long bone marrows of the long bone helps in the formation of the blood cells, that is the red blood cell and the white blood cell. It is also the storehouse of the calcium and phosphorus. The bones are also the storehouse of the calcium and phosphorus. So now we have to see the constituents of the skeleton. So there are three basic constituents of the skeleton, that is bones, cartilage and the ligaments. The bones are hard and there are 206 bones in human adult, whereas the number of bones is more in case of a small child, and these small bones joins together to larger ones. So that is why the number of bones gets reduced with the age. So there are 206 bones in our human skeleton. Cartilage is also there. So cartilage acts as supporting and connecting structure. So this cartilage will help in the support and projecting the external ears and the tip of the nose. Then the another structure is the ligaments. Ligament and tendons you have studied in the previous chapters or previous classes. TBM, tendons connects bones to muscles and ligaments connects bones to bones. Okay. Now we have to see about the bones. Bones are composed of the organic and the inorganic material. Organic material and the inorganic material. Inorganic material will have basically the salts of calcium and phosphate. Calcium and magnesium, sulfates and phosphates. Organic is the bone cells. The bone cells present in bones is known as osteocyte or osteoblast. Okay. The bone cells are known as osteocyte and osteoblast, and these osteocytes or osteoblasts are arranged in concentric patterns like this. Concentric patterns, it means when more than one circle will have the same center, it is known as concentric circles. So the bone cells, osteocytes, will be arranged in concentric patterns. Then what is decalcification? D, it means removal, calcium. So removal of calcium is known as decalcification. And how we can do the decalcification of bone? By keeping it in HCl. So it is N. Okay. Now how the bones can be oxidized? By heating, the bones can be oxidized. So the organic material will turn into oxidized matter. with the aging, what happens? The organic part of the bone gets reduced. So that is why it will result into the problem of osteoporosis. The density of the bone will get less, and when the density of the bone will be reduced, osteoporosis, okay, when the density of the bone will be reduced, the person with EG strokes can get fracture. Okay, now there are types of bones: long bones, then short bones, irregular bones, and flat bones. Long bones are longer, then they are wide and muscles act on them as rigid levers. Short bones, okay, then irregular bones are like this, neither flat nor long, and the flat bones. So example of long bones are the bones of the arms, that is humerus or femur. Short bones are the bones of the ankle and the wrist. Then irregular bones are the bones present in the faces, facial bones and vertebral bones. And flat bones like the shoulder, scapula, then sternum, these are the flat bones. Now we have to see the structure of a long bone. The structure of typical long bone, it is highly calcified and mineralized. Okay, it is highly calcified and mineralized, hard and rigid connective tissue. It is very strong and can withstand severe stresses. It consists of the bone cells, and the bone cells are known as osteocytes. We have already done, and these osteocytes are arranged in the concentric patterns. Okay, then the ground matrix, in which the collagen fibers and mineral salts are deposited. So the osteocytes are arranged in the concentric pattern, and the space left in between these cells will be filled with the ground substance, ground matrix. Matrix is the fluid connective tissue. Okay, the part of the intercellular spaces is filled with a fluid that is known as matrix, and here the matrix will have the collagen fibers and the mineral salts. The external surface of the bone is covered by a membrane that is known as peristomia. So the external surface will be covered by a membrane, and this membrane will be known as periosteum. Okay, then it is supplied with the blood vessels. You can see here arteries and veins are there. So these arteries and veins are supplying the blood to the bones for their nutrition and the collection of waste material. A long bone has a hollow cavity in the middle that is filled with marrow, and it has two types of marrow, that is yellow marrow, and the spongy part of the bone will have marrow that is known as red bone marrow. So yellow bone marrow is made up of adipose tissue and the blood vessels, and from the yellow bone marrow, which type of blood cells will arise? That is WBC. And from the red bone marrow, which type of blood cells will arise? That is red blood cells. Okay, now the human skeleton is broadly classified into two categories for making your study more easy, that is the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. So axial skeleton like an axis, so the skull, the vertebral column, and the rib cage is forming the axial skeleton, whereas appendicular, it means the limbs. So the upper pectoral girdle, the lower pelvic girdle, forelimbs, and the hind limbs is forming the appendicular skeleton. Now we have to start with the axial skeleton, and the first part of the axial skeleton is skull. So skull has 8 flat bones. Okay, and these 8 bones are joined with fixed joint. Here you can observe these sutures. So sutures are the fixed joint which is present between the bones of the skull. Okay, and there are 14 facial bones. There are 14 facial bones. At the back of the cranium, there is a hole-like structure that is known as foramen magnum, and through this foramen magnum only the spinal cord will arise. Okay, and it will continue into the vertebral column. So location and function of foramen magnum you must understand. Foramen magnum is present at the base of the skull, and function, through this foramen magnum the spinal cord will arise and it will pass through the vertebral column. Now we have to see the vertebral column. The vertebral column, or this backbone or spinal column, is made up of 33 small bones, and these 33 small bones are known as vertebrae. And on the basis of the places, part of the body where it is present, it is of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 types of vertebrae. So the vertebrae present in the neck region is known as cervical vertebrae. The vertebrae present in the thoracic region is known as thoracic vertebrae. The vertebrae present in the waist region is known as lumbar vertebrae, and below the lumbar vertebrae is the sacral vertebrae or sacrum, and at the last it is coccyx. So there are 7 cervical vertebrae. How many cervical vertebrae? 7. Then there are 12 thoracic vertebrae, and there are 5 lumbar vertebrae. Okay, 5 sacral vertebrae and 4 coccygeal vertebrae. So 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic vertebrae, 5 lumbar vertebrae, 5 sacral vertebrae, and 4 coccygeal vertebrae. Okay, this is the structure of the vertebrae. So each vertebrae is somewhat a ring-like structure. You can observe this is a ring-like structure, and its lower part, this part is known as body or centrum, and the opposite ends of it, ends of the vertebrae centrum are flat. Okay, so this is known as neural spine. Above the centrum there is neural canal through which the spinal cord will pass, or this is also known as vertebral foramen, so foramen magnum from there. These are the transverse processes. This is the neural spine, and these are the articular facets through which the another vertebrae will get attached. In between the two vertebrae there is a cartilaginous pad-like structure that is known as gristle. G-R-I, okay, S-T-L-E. So what is the purpose of this gristle? This gristle will act as a cushioning pad between the two vertebrae. So it will reduce the friction and it will help in the bending and stretching movement of the vertebral column. So this gristle is also known as intervertebral cartilaginous disc or intervertebral cartilaginous pad. So location of it will be in between the two vertebrae, and the function of it will be to help in the bending and stretching movement. Now we have to see another part of the axial skeleton, that is sternum. So this is sternum. Sternum is a flat bone and it is present in the middle part of the chest. It is also known as breastbone. Now we have to see about the ribs. So there are 12 pairs of ribs. First to 7 pairs are actually known as, so ribs are at the back side, that is on the dorsal side, it is attached with the vertebral column, and on the ventral side it is attached with the sternum. So in this manner the ribs are forming a cage like structure, and this is known as rib cage, and inside the rib cage only the lungs will be present, the heart will be present, and such organs will be remain protected. So there are 12 pairs of ribs. First to 7 pairs of ribs is known as true ribs because they are attached to the sternum through hyaline cartilage. So they are directly attached to the sternum. First 7 pairs of ribs is known as true ribs. Why they are true ribs? Because they are directly attached to the sternum through the hyaline cartilage. Whereas 8, 9 and 10th pair of ribs is known as false ribs because they are not directly attached to the sternum. They are attached to the 7th rib and then it is attached with the sternum. whereas the 11th and 12th pair of ribs are known as floating ribs because they are not at all attached with the sternum on the ventral side. And all these ribs are attached to the thoracic vertebrae at the dorsal side. Now we have to see about the bones of the limbs. Here you can observe this is the forelimb. Forelimb, it means upper limb, and this is the hind limb, that is the lower limb. Okay, so this forelimb, the upper arm is known as humerus. Then below the humerus there is ulna and radius. So in between the humerus and the pectoral girdle there is a joint. This joint is known as ball and socket joint. So head of the humerus is acting like a ball, and this pectoral girdle is acting as a socket, and it will perform the free movement in almost all the directions. Here also the head of the femur and the pelvic girdle will act as a socket, and the head of the femur will act as a ball, so it will be ball and socket joint, and this also helps in performing the free movement in almost all the directions. The part of the forearm which is attached towards the thumb, that is known as radius. So RT, radius is towards the thumb, and ulna is just the opposite. There are 8 carpals in the wrist region, then 5 metacarpals in the hand, and then 14 phalanges in the fingers. The bones are known as phalanges, so there are 14 phalanges. In the same manner, this is the pelvic girdle, and this is the femur, that is the upper leg, then patella, that is knee cap, tibia and fibula. Okay, so tibia again towards the two long bones, that is inner is tibia and the outer is fibula. Okay, and then in the ankle there will be 7 tarsals. In the foot there will be 5 metatarsals, and there will be 14 phalanges in the fingers. Now we have to see about the girdles. The upper girdle is known as pectoral. This is pectoral girdle. Upper girdle, or also known as pectoral. PECTORAL. Pectoral girdle. Okay. So this pectoral girdle is formed of clavicle towards the ventral side, scapula, this is the flat bone at the dorsal side, and this clavicle and scapula is joining to form a girdle on one half, then another clavicle and another scapula. It is forming a ring like a structure, so that is why it is known as pectoral girdle. Pectoral, it means upper, and girdle, it is forming a ring like a structure. Okay, now this is the pelvic girdle. Again it is forming a ring like a structure here and here, so that is why it is girdle. Pelvic because it is present in the lower part. It is made up of 3 bones, that is ilium, then ischium, this is the ischium, and this is the pubis. Okay, you are observing a difference in the diameter of the pubic area is more in female. So male skeleton is generally larger and heavier. In the female skeleton, the pelvic or hip bone is wider. You can observe here, this is wider. And why it is wider? So that it is able to adapt for the conceiving or pregnancy, so that it will be trough shaped and the fetus in the uterus can be easily adapted over there. Then we have to see about the joints. So there are 3 basic types of joints, that is immovable joint, partially movable joint, and freely movable joint. Immovable joint, the bones at the joint does not move. First of all, what is a joint? Joint is a part of the body where 2 separate bones are meeting. Such points are known as joints. So the points where 2 bones are meeting is known as joints. So there are immovable joints when the bones at the joint does not move at all, and it is found in the skull bones. You have seen the sutures are there. So sutures are making the fixed joint. Then we have to see is the partially movable joint. The joint where the bones are partially moving, that is known as partially movable joints. Example is the rib and the breastbone between the vertebrae. And then freely movable joint, when the bones are capable to move in almost all the directions. So freely movable joints are also known as the synovial joints, and this will allow large range of movements. The articular surface is covered by a hyaline cartilage. Okay, this is the hyaline cartilage over here, and the presence of joint cavity is filled with a fluid that is known as synovial fluid. This will act as a lubricant and will reduce the friction while movement of the bones at these joints. So here is the diagram. This is the spongy bone, another spongy bone. The green one is the articular cartilage, and above this dark blue one is the synovial membrane, and this synovial membrane is secreting a fluid that is known as synovial fluid. So this synovial fluid acts as a lubricant and will reduce the friction while the bones are moving at the joints. Now we have to see the examples of these freely movable or the synovial joints. Example is the first one is the gliding joint, and this gliding joint is present in between the bones of the wrist, and you can perform the movement only in one direction. Then the pivot joint. Here one bone is rotated over a pivot-like structure. So here this is the vertebral column, and this is the skull. So this skull is rotating over a pivot-like structure. So this vertebral column is acting like a pivot. So this joint is known as pivot joint. It is present between the skull and the axis of the vertebrae. So first two vertebrae is known as atlas and axis. Then the hinge joint, like in the doors and windows, you must have seen the hinge. Hinge is providing the forward and the backward movement only. So this joint is present at the elbow and the knees. Another joint is the ball and socket joint. We have already seen the head of the femur is acting like a ball, whereas the pelvic girdle is making like a socket, and it is forming a ball and socket joint, and it is providing the movement in almost all the directions. Now we have to see the muscles. Muscles is helping in movement. Due to the muscles, it gives a shape and contour to your body. It maintains the posture. Then what is tendon? Tendon is the type of fibrous tissue which connects bones to muscles. We also know that each bone is covered with an antagonistic pair of muscles. Antagonistic in the sense because these muscles, this pair of muscles will work in opposition to each other. For example, the biceps and triceps attached to the humerus. So if the biceps will contract, the triceps will expand. So that is why the muscles attached to the bones or skeletal muscles are always antagonistic in nature. Then there are three kinds of muscle, that is voluntary muscle, involuntary muscle, and cardiac muscle. We already know about all these types of muscle in the tissue chapter we have seen. Then we have to see about the liver mechanism. Okay, you know there are three classes of liver, that is class 1 liver, class 2 liver, and class 3 liver. So and in these livers there is three terms: effort, fulcrum, and load. Here load is denoted as resistance, that is R. Okay, so here in your body, that is in between the vertebral column and the skull, which class liver is there? That is class 1 liver. You can observe here, this is the effort. You are holding a head on your body, so effort, and you can move the head in sideways and up and down direction, that is fulcrum. And this is the resistance. You are maintaining the distance between the chest and the head region. So this is the resistance. So class 1 liver is found over here. Class 2 liver, FLE, that is resistance is between. Okay. So in this case, it is found in the lower limb, that is the fulcrum on the knee, on the ankle, or you can say foot. You can move up and down. So this is the effort and this is the resistance. Whereas the forearms is showing the class 3 lever. Okay, effort is here, fulcrum is here, you are moving at this point, and resistance if you are holding any object over here, so that is load. So we find the 3 class of lever in a body. So this is all for your exams. Prepare well and all the best. Thank you everyone.